Good afternoon, everyone. It is Wednesday. Story time and history with Miss Amanda. Yes, today we will read a book called What Was the Underground Railroad? We all know now the railroad was not tracks and it was not a train. The railroad was a way to freedom for the black man. And this book is about slavery. Do you guys know what slavery is? Slavery was a time of life when black man was brought from Africa, brought over to America, and was sold by a white man to another white man. It was a time in life when black men did not have freedom to do anything. They was caught, they was sold to the white man, and the white man controlled the black people. So today I want you to learn a little history that what went on with the African-American peoples in this world. Do you know that slavery was a time when black man could do nothing but work in a field or work in a white man's home? That is what slavery all about. And slavery, black man worked without getting paid. Yes, they was divided off away from their families. The husband, the wife, and the children was all sold off to different plantations. And back in those days, students, the families never came together again. Once the black man was sold and his wife and his children was taken away from him, they never seen each other again. So let me read you this book. What was the Underground Railroad? This book was written by a young lady named Yana McDonough. Yes. You can condition in which individuals, slavery was a condition in which individuals are owned by others who control where they live and where they work. Slavery had previously existed throughout history in many times and most places. To be a slave is to be owned by another person. A slave is a human being, guys. Forced to work for nothing and is whipped if refused to work or maybe they were killed. Today, we will be reading the book, What Was the Underground Railroad? It was a railroad with no trains and it had no tracks. It was a route to the north, to freedom through enslaved people. That is what this book is all about. How the black man was freed and escaped from being a slave. What was the Underground Railroad? On March Day in 1849, two men tossed a big wooden box onto a steamboat boat that was about to head up the Potomac River to Washington, D.C. Nobody cared how the box landed. The men thought that it was just filled with something ordinary. But they were wrong. Inside the box was a real live man. Just imagine a real man was in that box and they just tossed that box any kind of way they wanted to. But they didn't know a live man was inside that box. The man's name was Henry Brown. He was a slave, escaped from Virginia. He was hoping to reach Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Slavery was illegal in Pennsylvania. It would be free there. Pennsylvania was a free land. Slaves did not live in Pennsylvania. Black man was a person like anyone else. The box that Henry in, it landed upside down. Now he was on his head. He was scared and oh how his head hurt. Would he ever get to Philadelphia? He just didn't know. Although he was on a steamship, Henry was traveling on something called the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad was not an actual railroad with metal tracks and passenger cars. It did not run underground. No one knew for sure where the name came from. It meant the escape route African American slaves took to seek freedom. One story said that in 1831, a slave named Tice Davis fled from Kentucky to Ohio. Kentucky was a slave state. Ohio was a free state. When David Matter found out, he was shocked. He was as if Tice Davis had vanished into the air. The master joked that his slave must have gone off on an underground railroad. Is this story true? No one knew for sure, but the term Underground Railroad track stuck. Escaped slaves fled to free states and Canada any way they could. They often went on foot. A lot of times the slaves would run and they would travel on the north route until they came to a free state. They would travel hundreds of miles. They went hidden in wagons. They went by train and they went by boat. They often went at night to avoid capture. Whites and other blacks along the way helped them. These people was called conductors. The journey was scary and it was filled with danger. The slaves would be sent back and severely punished if they was caught. But the danger did not stop them. Freedom was worth the risk. That is the story of some of these people, who they were, where they went, and what happened to them along the way, and how their lives changed. In chapter 1, a slave trade, in 1619, a ship clocked in Jamestown, Virginia. It carried about 20 people who had been kidnapped from their homes in West Africa. This marked the beginning of slavery in America. In 1860, There was 4 million slaves in the United States. Virginia and other states in the South depended on the free labor of slaves to work the fields on farms called plantations. Every year brought more and more slaves. They arrived on slave ships. The trip from Africa across the Atlantic Ocean was known as the Middle Passage. The journey typically lasted 4 to 6 weeks. However, it could take as long as 12 weeks. Even a short trip was offered. There was 2 ways for the captain to load their ships: loose packaging and tight packaging. Loose packaging meant captains didn't take as many Africans as their ship could carry. More ships and air for the slaves on board made less likely that they would become sick and they would die. Healthy slaves brought a better price. Tight packaging was much worse. The captain would crowd as many people into the ship as they could. They was packed like sardines in spaces that was sometimes no more than 18 inches high. There was barely room to move or even breathe. The captains didn't care. He figured that the more Africans on board, the more money he would make in America. If some died, the captain said, so what? What was it like on a slave ship? Slaves was often chained their ankles to their wrists. There were no bathrooms. They used buckets instead, with no way to keep their living space clean. They came down with diseases like the flu and like the smallpox. To save money, some captains brought along very little food as a resort. Many people starved to death. The Middle Passage was so horrible, some preferred to jump overboard, kill themselves, drown, or they simply stopped eating. It was just that bad traveling from Africa to America. People would pile on top of each other. People died on their way to America. Black African-American people. If they survived the journey to America, the Africans were sold in auctions. This meant that white people bid money to buy them, just like they might buy a horse or a cow. Each person was sold to the highest bidder. Auctions was advertised with signs and in newspapers. At an auction, a large group of newly arrived black men, women, and children was put on display. White men came beforehand to inspect. So when the African Americans got there and they went into auctions, they was put on display so the white man could look them over and decide which one they want to purchase. They was buying people like they was horses and like they was cows. And they would take these people and they would work these people and pay them no money. They pried open their mouths to check and see if they had good teeth. They pinched their muscles to make sure that they were strong and that they had strength, that they would be able to work. No one cared about how the slave felt. They was not considered as being human beings. Wow, that's awful. Options tore families apart. After a mother was sold, she might have to watch one of her children get sold to another owner from a different state. Her babies would be yanked away from her, and there was nothing she can do about it. Husbands and wives, fathers and mothers, sisters and brothers were often sent to live on plantations far, far away from each other. In most cases, they never saw each other again. In 1808, the United States ended the slave trade. No more Africans could be brought to America for purchase. But the law didn't change anything for the enslaved peoples already in the United States. They were still slaves. And their children and grandchildren will be born slaves. So the number of slaves in America grew and grew. The only hope for a better life for these African Americans was to escape. The only way for those slaves to be free, they had to escape from their plantation. In chapter 2, I will read to you the life in a plantation. Slavery took root in the southern states because there was so much good farming there. There was a lot of good farmland. Big plantations needed lots of work to tend the crop. And slaves had no work for free. They had to work for free. In the 1600s, many plantations grew tobacco. And in 1700, the big crops in the South was rice. And in the 1800s, the main crop was cotton. First, the slaves had to pluck some balls of cotton from the cotton plant. Next, they had to clean the cotton balls and get them ready for spinning. Then the cotton was spun and turned into cloth. The richest slave owner lived in a big estate and might own as many as 400 slaves. Wow, that was a lot of slaves to live at one plantation. These slave owners lived like lords and ladies. They had fancy parties and fancy dances. They went on hunts. They ate good food and they wore expensive clothing. There were small plantations too. These plantations was more likely ordinary farms. The owner wasn't rich and might own only one or a couple of slaves. But they certainly lived much better than their slaves did. And it was slave labor and supported all the plantation, the large ones and the small ones. A life of slavery was work, and more work. That's all the slaves did. They just worked, and worked. And while they was working, guys, they always had a white man standing over them with a whip. And if they would stop work just to get a minute of rest, they was whipped across the back with a whip. They treated the black African Americans so bad in the 1800s. If they did something wrong, they was often beat and whipped. Slave children did not go to school. In fact, Slaves was forbidden to learn how to read or write. So guys, you see how important it is to read and write? Slavery is no longer. So anytime you can pick a book up, read it. Pick up a pencil and write. Because now there is no longer slavery and you have the rights. You have the rights to read and to write. You have the rights to learn. Slavery was forbidden to learn anything about reading and writing. They could not even vote, or they couldn't even own their own home. They couldn't own anything, guys. Some slaves work in the fields. A field slave worked from sunrise to sunset. They work all day long. Women's work as hard as men. Pregnant women's work in the field right up until the birth of their babies. Then they work with their babies strapped to their backs. Children over the age of 12 was expected to work as hard as the grown-ups. The field slaves watched all day long by an overseer with a whip. The overseer was usually a white man. Remember, I just told you that. It would be a white man standing over them all day long, from sunrise to sunset, making sure that they work all day long. The overseer was usually a white man. He made sure the slaves never wasted a moment. And if they did, a flip of that whip made them get back to work. Field slaves usually live in tiny huts with dirty floors. In the wintertime, the huts was freezing cold. And instead of a bed, they had only rough blankets and maybe some straw spread on those floors. At the end of the long days in the field, slaves on a cotton plantation had to line up. Their cotton was weighed. They was expected to pick at least 200 pounds of cotton a day. Field slaves had Sunday off. Sometimes they was given Saturday afternoon off too, but not during harvest time. Then they might work an 18-hour shift. House slaves, they worked mostly indoor. They cleaned, they cooked, they served meals, and they took care of the master's children. They waited on tables, they washed, they ironed, they swept dust, they dusted, and they weeded the gardens out. House slaves also did weaving, mending, quilting, and spinning. Some learned to make lace. House slaves often live in a closet or a corner of the big house, even if the rest of their families lived in the slave quarters. Although they did not get Sunday off, most house slaves, those are the ones that live in the house that did the cleaning, the cooking, the washing, the ironing, and all that stuff. They lived it better than the field slaves. The field slaves woke up picking cotton, going to bed. They was working 18 hours and over a day. House slaves sometimes even managed to learn how to read and write. But fill a house, inside or out, one thing was for certain. Life as a slave was a nightmare. The dream of every enslaved person every slave wanted to be free. They wanted their freedom. They did not like working and slaving for the white man. The life on the plantation, it was nothing nice. It was horrible, guys. Either being a field slave, that's that slave I was telling you about that worked the fields from sunset to from sunrise to sunset. They worked it all day long. And if they take one moment of rest, the white man standing over them with a whip will whip them across their back. That was a horrible life to live, guys. That was not an easy life. So you must listen to this history. This is important history, letting you know how black African-American people was freed from slavery. Slavery was horrible. They had to work for no money from sunrise to sunset. They had to do all the work for the white man. The beginning of this story told you how black African Americans was brought from Africa to America. The Americans and sold to the white man and forced to work free. We will continue the story next week. This story will continue next week, telling you how slaves escaped to freedom by the way of the railroad. But remember, guys, I told you it's not like a railroad you see every day that have railroad tracks and they have a train on it. This is not the type of railroad I am talking about. I am talking about a railroad. It is a route heading north that black man had to travel to get to freedom. And you all know, freedom is priceless. It is wonderful to have freedom. So I will see you guys next week. I will see you next week with more history and story time with Miss Amanda. I love you guys. I love you, I love you, I love you. So come back next week and try to find out how black man was freed from slavery. See you next week. Story time and history time with Miss Amanda.